Have you ever asked yourself, why can't my partner love me the way I really need to be loved? Well, in this video, we're going to talk about the 5 ways that relational trauma impacts your current relationship. And most importantly, the ways that it may be preventing you from having the kind of relationship you really desire. My name is Tom Philp, and I'm a trauma-informed coach. I've been working with couples for years to help them overcome their challenges with relational trauma so they can regain a sense of trust in themselves and others and experience a safe and secure relationship. All right, the first way that trauma impacts our current relationships is it breaks down a sense of trust. Trust not only within ourselves, to be able to trust our own feelings and our own experiences, but to be able to trust the motives and intentions of our partner. When we experience neglect, when we experience trauma like abandonment or rejection, when these repeated experiences occur in the past, then that builds up a wound inside of us. And whenever we have a wound, because we're made for connection, we're also made for protection. And that protection part of us will step in, and it will limit any ability for people to try to re-trigger that wound again. When this happens, oftentimes that protective part, it will actually question the intentions of others. It will question the motives of others, and it will make us second guess our own experiences, and I'm speaking of internal experiences here as well. So the first way that trauma may actually be spilling into your current relationship, it may be preventing you from having the kind of relationship you really want, is the basic sense of trust. Trust in yourself and trust in your current partner. And because trust is so foundational, all relationships are built on trust, it's really hard to build other capabilities on top of that when this particular foundation is so shaky in the first place. So what I see an awful lot with couples and individuals I see that working through their trauma is that they have to be able to regain trust in themselves once again so that they can then extend that trust to others. All right, number 2, the second way that trauma can disrupt your current relationship is through emotion dysregulation and conflict cycles. Let me explain. Emotion dysregulation happens when we can get triggered. And when we get triggered, something starts to come close to or touch that wound that I talked about a few minutes ago. And when that happens, we've only got so many choices. We can go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, but we become very dysregulated. And when we become dysregulated, it makes it more difficult for us to be able to access that part of us that actually is the healthy, untraumatized part, the part that lives in all of us, that is calm, curious, connected, competent, and actually that part that helps us be able to stay open and connect with others. And so when that dysregulation occurs, we immediately go into our protection. And one of the hallmarks of trauma is that it actually shrinks our window of tolerance. It shrinks the part of us that can stay calm, curious, and connected. And when that window shrinks, we're more likely to pop out of it. When we get triggered, we're more likely to go into fight or flight or to freeze and fawn responses. And when this happens, of course, this can also trigger our partner we're with, and this can create conflict cycles in our relationship. Remember, it's really, really difficult to be able to try to connect to somebody else through our own protection. And if our protection triggers them and they're in their protection, then you've got two people trying to connect through their defenses and through their protection, and that is darn near impossible. So what I see that happens a lot in relationships is when people get triggered and their protection comes up, they pop out of their window, they're no longer able to stay calm, curious, and connected and grounded in themselves. And this usually creates cycles in the relationship. When these cycles repeat over and over and over, it can actually start to tilt people's expectations. They no longer feel like their partner is somebody who's for them, but maybe somebody who's now against them. Or it tilts them to feel more negative about their relationship as well. And then it continues to erode trust in themselves. And they begin to ask these questions that I opened this video with. Why can't I find a partner that can love me the way I really need to be loved? All right, number 3. The third way that trauma disrupts or blocks you from having the kind of relationship you want in your current relationship is through certain relational patterns. Now, one of the phrases most commonly used is attachment patterns. This could be an attachment pattern. It could come out of some early trauma from your formative attachment relationships, and it could be something you've carried through. It could also just be a relationship pattern that you have developed over time because of some repeated past experiences. Either way, what happens is we get into these patterns where we actually start to avoid that which we fear the most. And so they can act as common And so what can happen is they can act as self-fulfilling prophecies. Let me give you an example. Let's say your partner comes and says, I want to go out with a good friend I haven't seen in years. We're going to go have dinner. I won't be home for dinner on Tuesday night. And you say, okay, no problem. But then as you start to think about this, it starts to feel like a rejection. And it starts to feel like your partner purposely didn't ask you. And you start thinking about this and getting more upset. So when your partner comes home, they're all excited to want to talk to you about what they learned from their friend. They hadn't seen him in so long, the stories that they shared. But what happens to you? Instead, you start to withdraw, you start to shut down, and pretty soon your partner gets kind of upset. What's wrong with you? What's going on? Oh, nothing, I'm fine. And then they retreat to the bedroom. And then in this kind of a moment, what happens is this relationship pattern repeats itself. You think to yourself, oh, I knew that my partner was rejecting me. See, I knew it. Now they're upstairs in the bedroom. And it's because of these fears and these relationship patterns that can take hold and grip you, and we can actually be attracted to things that are unhealthy for us and repeat those patterns in our relationships. Whether that tends to fall into more of the classification of anxious, avoidant, or disorganized style, and it may fall into one of those because those correlate very strongly with our nervous system responses of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And there's only so many options, but it may not necessarily be something as rigid as one of those be, and we can't always classify that. We've got to be more flexible, but it could look something very similar to that. But the point is, what can happen is we can fall into these types of relational patterns in our relationships where we end up repeating the same thing over and over. We end up being attracted to someone who's emotionally unavailable to us. And then we look back and we think, well, I had a mother or a father that was emotionally unavailable. Here I am repeating this same pattern. So number 3 is the patterns that we can repeat and find ourselves in our relationships that blocks our ability to be able to have the kind of relationship we really want. Number 4, fear of abandonment or rejection. And I want to add here exaggerated fears of abandonment and rejection. Part of the way our nervous system works is it wants to protect us from getting wounded again. This makes perfect sense and is actually a very normal and healthy part of the way our system works. The problem, though, is that our fears can become exaggerated. And this is how fears typically work. If we were hurt in one circumstance right here, our fear says, okay, in order to not get hurt like this again, we're going to broaden that circle. And we're going to make sure that we don't go anywhere near what actually caused that. And maybe this circle isn't big enough. We need a bigger circle. And so oftentimes we can find ourselves with exaggerated fears of being rejected or abandoned or having a partner that's emotionally unavailable or doesn't care. And they can trigger these core wounds inside of us as well. I knew it. I knew I was unworthy of love, or I knew I was too much for others. And so it's really important but difficult work to do to be able to tease apart what is it that's coming from me, what might be an exaggerated fear here in this situation, versus what is my partner's motives or intentions. Oftentimes, we use something called projection, where we take these fears and we place them on somebody else as if that's what their intention was, and then we act as if that is true. And so we really need to be able to be careful about the exaggeration of these fears. Part of working through trauma, part of resolving trauma and creating post-traumatic growth is to be able to tease apart and recognize, oh, I'm actually not in danger in this moment. I don't need to respond with fear. I'm actually safe and I'm with somebody who I know can keep me safe. But being able to recognize that and recognize how that might bubble up into your current relationship is one of the most significant ways that I see that current trauma really impacts current relationships. Okay, the fifth and final way that trauma impacts your current relationship and may be blocking you from having the kind of relationship you really desire is the inability to repair disruptions when they happen. Now, this is something I've talked about a lot, especially on my podcast. It is a normal part of all relationships. All relationships are going to have some times where they disconnect, sometimes where there's some disruptions in the emotional bond, times where they go from feeling connected and they have some kind of disruption. Now they're unconnected. But the whole point is, how can the couple learn to come back and make those repairs and get back to a place of connection? And we call this cycle the disruption or the rupture repair cycle. And so when I say rupture, I don't want you to think it's irreparable, meaning it's unable to be repaired. I just mean that there's a break in the emotional bond between you and your partner. Whether it's some kind of conflict, disagreement, or even just a misunderstanding, in those moments, there's a disruption and a break in that emotional bond. And one of the things that I see that couples struggle with the most is their ability or inability to be able to come back together and sit down and talk through what happened. When I see a lot of couples or even individuals and they want to talk about their relationships and they talk about the conflict they have, and I ask them, okay, when the conflict's over, do you all come back and talk about it? Usually the immediate answer is no, we don't. We sweep it under the rug, we move on, we repair other ways, but we don't come back and discuss what actually happened. And oftentimes I get it, because I think the couple is afraid of going right back into those strong emotions once again, going right back to that level of intensity. And so they just avoid it because they're afraid that, well, if I bring it back up, my partner's going to get all upset, I'm going to get all upset, and we're going to go right back to that dysregulated place. But it's really, really important for couples to be able to learn how to reach out and make those repairs. How do we learn and update our information about one another when we have those types of disconnections? Can we sit back down in a more calm place, in a more calm manner, and can we reconnect so that we emotionally get back to we're okay? We emotionally get back to a reset, if you will. But we do it because we've now upgraded and learned about what happened. What did you hear me say? Here's what I heard. Here's what I thought you meant in that moment. Here's what it looked like to me. Here was my focus and my motivation and my intention. And we can share those perspectives with our partner, and they can share theirs with us. And when that happens, we actually can learn and grow as a couple. And so post-traumatic growth with a rupture repair process looks like we have fewer ruptures, we stay connected longer, and when we do, they don't last as long. Ruptures don't go on for hours or days or weeks at a time, but rather we can close that gap together because we've got the tools and we know how to come back together. Hey, thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. My name is Tom Philp, and I'm here to remind you to stay grounded, clear, and connected.